right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we will reconvene our meeting. Thank you very much for your patience while we had a little bit of a break. Council, I think now that we've finished all of the deputations, we're going to go back to our discussion regarding staff report DCS 17-03 regarding the Long Point update. I will remind Council that I think we have dealt with portions of the recommendation. We've dealt with the matter of implementation of a new washroom cluster. We did deal with the matter of whether or not to remove the existing privies, and that motion to remove them was defeated. So for the time being, those remain. We still have to deal with a recommendation regarding removal of 47 of the existing on-street shoulder parking spaces and changing the decision, or at least a recommendation to change our parking limit time. So I'm going to go back to that, and I'll invite further discussion regarding, in particular now, let's deal with the matter of parking spaces that were part of the staff report coming back. In other words, option 2. Councillor Height to start. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, are we eliminating question period then? Because I have a considerable amount of questions on this report.
No, we're not.
So can we do the questions now, or did you want us to jump right to the parking?
No, go ahead. I'll let you go ahead with some of your questions regarding the report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. In our previous motion, it was directed that staff negotiate an agreement with the landowner at 142 Erie Boulevard to use the current property as a parking lot. And my question through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Baird, did you speak with that landowner?
Through the chair, no, we did not.
And what was the reason for that?
When we looked at the air photography through the chair, there was a considerable part of that property that is M&R property, and so we needed to define where and how that parking would be required, and further whether there is in fact a need for that parking. The building has since been removed, so it is open, and in our report we'd made mention that there is sufficient parking in close proximity, and the question that staff had was there a need for additional in that particular case, where as we're aware now, there is significant beach erosion, and is that what we want to do is bring more people to a location which may be in question for beach use in the first place. So we basically said we'd not pursue it at this time.
Okay, because that is right close to the stores, and that's where if people wanted to park, there is very limited on-street parking through there, and if you wanted to go for an ice cream, it doesn't take long for those parking spots to fill up. Right, M&R, it's already a parking lot, basically, because he's tore down the building and doesn't plan on doing anything with it. One of my major problems is that this is a well-respected business owner who I've spoke to on numerous occasions over this. He's also a large farmer out of the Waterford area, and it really would have been nice had he received a phone call. I will make what I consider a courtesy call tomorrow to get council out of that embarrassing situation, but I think a phone call would have been at least nice to thank him for his effort, and I'll do that on behalf of council. But now, we mentioned we spoke earlier about the road stubs, and we're not able to put a washroom in those points, and that's because of the marsh. Is it, Mr. Baird?
That's correct, Councillor Height. It's just although they show on the plan existing, they're just clearly road, ditch, and right into the marsh area.
So even the one at Winston, at some point in time, I went back through Google Earth and I looked back to 06, and it's grown somewhat since then. So somehow there's the ability to fill those spots in, because I'm sure maybe in 2000 that wasn't filled in. So what would be the process to fill those spots in for extra washrooms or a change room?
Sure. Through the chair, I've had some discussions with our colleagues at M&R on that. They were of the opinion that it was possibly M&R property, and I brought to their attention our information that we have on our GIS system. So they're going to look into that further, but that has always been sort of they considered for their use, for the trail that goes back into the marsh area. But I would think anything we would do there, we'd have to consult with them. If the county does in fact own the other stubs, what would be required for, extending areas into that, or taking away or impacting marshland or habitat, that sort of thing. But we can certainly pursue that.
Okay, because one of the roadblocks I feel we might run into, and that is the one at Winston that is filled up, because that is the trailhead for M&R's trail system. Is it not? The
Again,
other ones are just, like you said, in the marsh part.
correct, yeah. It's a logical spot. A lot of people park there. A lot of people use it to, to walk in from that headland. But I'm not sure if there's any other specific uses there.
Okay.
Councillor Haight, before you go on, just for my help, if nothing else, Mr. Baird, attachment B to the report, which is the one that shows a zoom in on this particular stub that we're speaking of, just so I'm correct, we see the red circle surrounding it, and then we see what appears to be a property boundary outline, the rectangle. Is that the property that we think we own as Norfolk County?
Through the chair, that's correct. I would suggest not think,
We
but
do
it
own.
is, it
All right,
is
sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
historically shown as a county road allowance.
Right.
It matches everything else that is down there. And, yeah, so that would be the legal boundary, plus or
Okay.
minus. And you can see over time, that parking area has just sort of been created. It's certainly not all defined on there, but it is in place and it is being used.
And so then further to Councillor Height's point, the other two stubs at the end of Brant and the end of Pines, although they don't appear on the aerial photography, because I too saw it, it appears as though it's just marsh. That may have been or was, but probably a stub just like the Winston one, as far as we know.
That's correct. And again,
Okay.
this old plan of subdivision, it dates back, a considerable amount of time.
Yep.
And perhaps in the day, there was intentions of developing into the marsh when that was
Okay.
considered appropriate.
All right. Thank you for that clarification, and sorry to interrupt, Councillor.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, on one of the resolutions, it was mentioned to provide a washroom/change house at 142 Erie Boulevard, similar to the one in Port Dover. Now, obviously, I wasn't clear enough in my description on that. Like, the one at Port Dover, the pimped-out one, is obviously in an urban core and requires the urban hookups. But there are other variations to that particular unit. Were you able to call and get a competitive quote from any of our local suppliers?
Through the chair, I took your resolution word for word and made the assumption that it was that portable unit, similar to the one in Port Dover, and worked with Mr. Cridlin's staff to go back through and find out what the costs were. That unit was acquired through competitive bid, and the prices we've shown here on page 27 of approximately $165,000. Granted, I think what you're suggesting, your question to me now, there are other options, perhaps, not on wheels. There's a number of manufacturers, I think we can think, that make sort of a ground-based type system. I'm not sure, certainly a change house, but I think the washroom issue, we could get water to it, but it would require holding tanks and pump outs, that sort of thing. And we didn't take that any further.
Yeah. Okay, because I do want to inform council, I spoke with our current supplier who does the pump outs now. And I'll agree with council, the councilors that think the porta potties in front of the houses are ugly. Now, he showed me some new units that he has, okay? And they're a standalone, basically they come on a trailer, the tongue is removable, and you can join them all up together. He says for 4 of them, our cost would be $1,500 a month. That gives us 2 women's washrooms, 2 men's washrooms. They're nice looking units, they're nice and clean. They have the water and the septic in holding tanks underneath of them. The only problem when I spoke with him this afternoon was that they require a hydro hookup, which we don't have there. But he's going to research out this option of solar power, because all it requires is a low voltage LED light and a pump to run the water. It includes hand washing stations like a sink. So we wouldn't necessarily need those extra items, and he'd be willing to work with us on that. And they're decent looking, they're not the cheap plastic looking things, so that's an option for this council to consider should we move forward. Now, I guess here's where one of the biggest beefs I have, that when council's added the direction that the 4-hour time limit on Erie Boulevard be changed to no overnight parking. There's several reasons for this. Okay, 4 hours to go to the beach with your family, yes, you can do it. But are you rushing, or are you leaving your kids by the water to run over and move your car? You definitely would be at 2 hours, so I'm totally against the 2-hour parking. 4 hours I could probably live with. I prefer the no overnight parking because I receive so many complaints from cottagers, and it's about the performance of Norfolk County. We cannot enforce the 4-hour time limit. We have 2 students that run around and get tickets and have to tick on each tire on this car. And they might, if you put a 2-hour parking spot in here, you might as well stick 3 students down there to run up and down with stopwatches. It takes you half an hour to walk to the beach with kids, and by the time you come back, you're going nowhere. Okay, but I do have a question in this, and that is, where did the 56 parking spaces go? The original motion was to remove 163. In this report, there's 107. Somehow from when when we dealt with that motion and over to this one, we've somehow lost 56 parking spots. Mr. Baird?
Let me answer that the question firstly. The resolution that council had passed was that the 4-hour time limit on Erie Boulevard be changed to no overnight parking.
Period.
No overnight parking already exists in that location, on those locations. It's signed accordingly. So it was a bit unclear in terms of the 4-hour time limit. So the suggestion was, and it had always been back before 5, 6 years ago, Norfolk County residents were hoping to have a place where they could stop legally, park, and enjoy the beach for a walk after dinner or during the day. And that would provide that opportunity, that 2-hour. It provides for better turnover, easier enforcement, and so on. Again, the second part of your question was, in this motion, this direction, it did not include the removal of 163 parking spaces.
The original motion that was on the floor did.
Well, the motion that was passed, Mr. Chairman, is included in the report. So, I mean, that's an option. Council can remove all of them. If that was the discussion from staff's recommendation in the spirit of this, was perhaps to tighten up the amount of parking that's in those cluster and concentrate them around the closer access points. We'd be able to perhaps have some sort of compromise or midpoint.
But when we started, we had 163 parking spaces. Now this report, and I don't see the part where council said to remove 56 parking spaces. But somehow we've removed 56 parking spaces and we're down to 107 with a further recommendation for another reduction. I don't know how we got from 163 to 107.
Through the chair, 167 again, or 163, it wasn't in that approved motion. So
No, there was no count in the approved motion, but the total number of parking spaces on Erie Boulevard was 163.
Yeah, I think I'm going to interject, Mr. Baird. That's my recollection too, that when the previous council approved creating some parking spaces on Erie Boulevard for visitors as well as residents, that was the number, I think, and in that ballpark, 150 plus. And we know that's the number that when cottage owners have come and petitioned council to make changes, that was the number. But I think in fairness though, Councillor Height, the actual recommendation in option 2 is a reduction of 47 existing on-street shoulder parking spaces. Doesn't say from 167 or from 107, although I know the text of the report references 107. But the 9 of us around the table know that we created 160 plus parking spaces when they were first created back there several years ago. So,
Right, on page 27, second paragraph,
yep.
it says staff recommend reducing the number of existing parking spaces from 107 to 60 spaces.
I understand that, but my point is the actual recommendation that they made to us in option 2 simply says a reduction of 47 existing on-street spaces.
So is that 47 now going to be taken away from 50? Because if we're just picking random numbers,
Well, no, it would be.
I'll pick 210 and we'll take 47 away.
Yeah, I think whatever number exists there today, which I believe we feel is 163, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but those were the number. Yep,
Mr.
okay, Mr. Cridlin is confirmed. I don't know, Mr. Baird.
Well, I think maybe for clarification, Mr. Cridlin and I went out earlier, or late last year,
Yes.
and we measured the distance between where those signs are located that indicate where parking is permitted. When we originally did that, we used a figure of 6 meters in terms of a length of parking stall. When you do parallel parking, you need 7 meters, not 6. 6 is the typical depth, a 3 meter by 6 meter spot, if that's, you know, parallel or like perpendicular or angle parking. So we took the actual distance as it's marked out there, divided by 7 meters, and we came up with that figure of 107 spaces.
107. Okay, so that explains how it happened, then, I think, Councillor Height.
Okay, do we actually need spaces on there? Maybe I could ask Ms. Robinson. Do we need lines to mark out the spots?
Ms. Robinson, can you help us on that one?
Through the chair to Councillor Height, interesting point of discussion is that the historical had little tick marks on Erie Boulevard for parking in those areas. With the recent reconstruction, we have chosen at this point to not replace the little tick marks on the road, feeling that some vehicles are larger and some vehicles are smaller, and without the specific delineation of the spaces, we're hopeful that we'll be able to achieve more parking as opposed to less parking in that area. So we have not instructed the contractor to put those tick marks back in place. Should we deem that necessary in the future, we can certainly do that as part of our line painting contract, but at this time, we have not replaced those tick marks on the asphalt.
Okay, thank you. Okay, to move on to my questions, it was mentioned about the privacy fences, and now you've come back with a cost of $5,000, and to me and probably most of the residents in Norfolk, that seems very high. Did you obtain a quote for that?
Through the chair, just a verbal quote in terms of linear feet of board fence is supplied, installed.
And how many feet would be required?
Each installation, we were looking at essentially a U with an open end. So it was 8 by 8 by 8. So 24 linear feet per install.
Okay. Because you do know that Home Depot sells those panels for $100. But, you know, like personally, I find that really inflated. And I also find down where you go down to the boardwalk, that's very inflated as well. What was the estimate on the square footage that you used to come up with that price?
Through the chair, for the fencing or the boardwalk?
The boardwalk.
The boardwalk's just based on prices that we've seen for decking, bridge work, pressure treated work.
And the measurements that you were going off of?
Measurements just basically off of our GIS system that goes from the potential entry point to the limits of that road allowance where it becomes Crown Beach.
And how many feet would that be?
I don't have the figure with me here, but it was certainly used to calculate out this cost.
Okay, it's probably you're looking at 200 feet and 10 foot wide. Would that meet the accessibility standard?
Again, I can't confirm the length, but as far as the width goes, it's basically, I don't even think it's 10 feet wide. It's just enough to provide passage for two wheelchairs or scooters or something like that. Offhand, I think it's about 7 feet width.
Okay, because that equates to $75 a square foot. I don't think I was looking to build a house at that point, but that seems high. But was that item passed over to the accessibility committee for their comments?
Through the chair, at this point, no. This is just purely some initial research to put forward to council. That $150,000 is not just for the ramp. It's also to do the excavation for the parking area, indicate that to be cleared, brush cleared with some granular material. So that's all included in that.
Okay. And next, I guess, would be the trash receptacles. The ones I had suggested dealt with recycling, and it would have reduced the amount of times that someone had to go to empty them. But instead, we come back with some modified 45-gallon drums. So Are these the ones that are used in Simcoe where they have a bag and you dig a hole and you drop the bag inside and you need a backhoe to pull them out?
Through the chair, that is correct. We contacted Moloch. It's a Canadian company. They provided a quotation, and it was $4,500 each. They're a deep system. It was not source separated. It was just purely for waste. So it does permit fewer collections between sort of the weekly or twice weekly collection. And the suggestion here is 10 of them at $4,500 would be $45,000, as indicated here in the report. And it was staff's suggestion that the 45-gallon drums being picked up twice a week or as required is still represents certainly a much more economically favorable option.
Right, because you require a backhoe to remove those bags out of the dirt, is that correct?
That's correct, Councillor Height. It does require a larger device to pick it up and dump it.
So that probably wouldn't work in the sand with the high water anyway. But why wasn't the big belly systems looked at?
Through the chair, I did look at Big Belly and wasn't able to get a price from them. We do have that deep system already in place, and we have a contact with them, so I use that as an option. If it's less or half the price for that matter, it's still considerable versus conventional drum and bi-weekly pickup.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further speakers or questions regarding the report? Okay, councillors, I think I'm correct when I remind you that the actual staff recommendation recommends to council that we approve options 2, 3, and 4 as outlined in the report. And those appear on page 4 of 6 in the report. We have dealt with option 3. We still need to deal with option 2, option 4, and potentially option 5 as well, although it isn't referenced specifically in the report, I don't think. So I need some direction from council regarding, let's deal with option 2 first, and that is the matter of reducing by approximately 47 the number of parking spaces available down there. Is that agreeable that we'll deal with that one first? Councillor Black.
So move.
Thank you. All right, we now have a further motion to discuss. Speaking to the motion, Councillor Brunton.
Mr. Chairman, that option 2 you referred to?
Yes, I am.
Well, and it includes 2-hour,
Yes, I'm sorry. That is a good point. I forgot that. It also includes the implementation of a 2-hour maximum with no overnight. We could, if council wishes, separate those two as we've done with other parts of this report, but I'll leave that up to the mover.
well, just on another question on whatever we put into there time-wise, how do you enforce it? Are you looking at painting the pavement again? Is that how you, what do you do, mark tires then, or how do you?
Sorry, Councillor, you're dealing with the number of parking spaces now?
Sorry, you're gonna split it, are you?
Well,
All right.
I was intending to.
I was looking at option 2, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'll wait if you want.
Well, I'm still prepared to have that split into two separate discussions and two separate motions
Well-
if need be. I'm just asking you which part that last question was relating to, parking spaces or parking limits, time-wise?
Well, both in a sense, because, well, the 2-hour, whatever, again, whatever time frame it is, how will the enforcement be done?
Okay, through the chair, and just to add to what Ms. Robinson had mentioned, for enforcing, we have to be able to define that a vehicle has been
Right.
in a set location beyond the prescribed or permitted timeframes. In any downtown setting, we use that parking stall and we define it by in front of 123 Main Street. We have to define it that way. It can't just be anywhere on Erie Boulevard. So that's what necessitated these painted T marks that were along the edge of the paved shoulder. Each one was numbered, and so it could be defined and it was enforceable. And that's worked effectively well. As far as enforcing of those vehicles, be it 2 or 4, if council wants to keep it 4, that's no problem. That's your choice. Our staff go down. We don't chalk tires. We don't touch vehicles. We can take photographs, but we generally mark where the valve stem is on the front driver's side tire. And when we come back after 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever, we can determine if it's moved from that point, and at that point, that's a valid way to determine a vehicle has gone beyond the permitted time frame, and then a tag is issued. So that's how that enforcement occurs, and it has occurred that way over the years.
So, Thank you. Is it option 2 in total, or are we
Well,
splitting it?
I think there would be some merit in separating them. If Councillor Black is okay with it, he was the one that said he would move. It was my error in not recognizing two fairly distinct parts to the motion. So I'm going to suggest, if you don't mind, Council or Councillor Black, that we separate that into two separate motions. And the first one I would request we deal with is the motion to reduce by 47, approximately, the number of on-street parking spaces that we presently have. Okay, that is the motion, Councillor Black. You're okay with it? All right. Any further speakers to that motion? And I think by dealing with this motion one way or another, we're almost in a sense going to be directing staff, or have to direct staff perhaps, to once again mark the boundaries of parking spaces somehow on our new pavement. Do you want to comment on that, Lee, before I deal with the motion?
Certainly, the intention with respect to that was staff were aware that this report was coming forward, and rather than having to paint and repaint and move paint lines around, given that we don't typically have a parking problem in the area for the winter months, we felt that it's something that could be delayed till the spring until we had clear council direction for which way to go before we replace those tick marks on the asphalt.
Thank you very much for that. That was clever, and you know how much we've struggled with this issue down there. All right, having heard that, I'm sorry, Councillor Wells.
What is the purpose of eliminating these 56 spots?
Mr. Baird?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of the reduction is to provide fewer vehicles, which means fewer people, which means fewer conflict on the beach locations. But it still provides a reasonable time frame and a reasonable number of spaces spread out across the length of Erie Boulevard for local residents, or visitors for that matter, to park freely for up to 2 hours so that they can experience the beach. And the suggestion being, if you want to be there for more than 2 hours, by all means, the provincial park is the place to go. It has full services. So we found it was a bit of a compromise, and some of the feedback we got from residents, cottage owners, was that that would be something that could be reasonable for council to consider. Again, this is just a staff suggestion. It can stay as is. This is your choice.
You're welcome. Councillor Brenton?
Just one other thing, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for letting me speak again. I think earlier tonight we decided that hopefully we can come up with more washrooms off the beach, as I call it, and onto Erie Ave. And if we can do that, would that not be the proper time to look at the number of parking spaces? Or, period? And not deal with parking spaces, period, tonight? But that's only my suggestion. Thank you.
Well, the only way to get a reading on that, Councillor, would be to put forward a motion for deferral, and that's your right if you wish. I'll let you think about that. Councillor Height?
Mr. Chair, I'd prefer we deal this right now as opposed to the never-ending saga myself, but the removal of parking spots is going to put us back to where we were. People will be parking in the front of those cottages. They will look for rental cottages to park their vehicles in. If there's a for rent sign and there's no vehicle in it, somebody's parking there. And then when the renter shows up, we're getting that call. And then that vehicle gets towed. Honestly, this is just opening up a bigger can of worms.
Thank you. Any further speakers on the motion? Then I will call the question. Those in favor of the motion to remove spaces? I see 3. Those opposed? I see 4. The motion is lost. So, in other words, I voted against as well. Maybe I missed a vote. I only had 3 in favor of the motion, and the balance opposed to the motion. 5, I'm sorry. 5. 3 and 5. My apologies. Okay, so the second part of that, which we have now separated, is to deal with the limits of parking. The recommendation in option number 2 was to implement a 2-hour maximum limit with no overnight parking. Is someone prepared to move that motion? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were doing both parts, Councillor. Thank you. All right, discussion on this part. Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the email that we received from one of the cottagers down there sums it up best. The 2-hour time limit is perfect way to deter tourists. So That's what we will essentially be doing by allowing 2 hours. No one takes their family to the beach for 2 hours. Right? If you're going to go for the day, yeah, maybe you do want to go to the park or Cottonwood Park. But if you're going to take your kids for a swim from 10 o'clock until 3 o'clock, do you really want to leave them at the water to go move your car? It takes you half an hour to walk to the beach. Right? And if you're a single parent, what, do you drag your 4-year-old and 3-year-old toddler back over the burning sand so that you can move your car? I hope that Ride Norfolk bus comes a lot more frequent if we do this.
Yes. Any further speakers on this motion? Seeing none, then I will call the question on the motion to implement a 2-hour maximum parking limit with no overnight parking. Those in favor? I see 2. Those opposed? I see 5, so that is lost. So that essentially, sorry, Councillor Height?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move the motion that we keep all existing parking with a 4-hour time limit.
Okay, all right.
Is that going to work this time? Like, I don't want some semantics going on here.
Well, I just consulted with the clerk regarding, I'm going to get to you in a second, Councillor, regarding the 4-hour, and I think that would be in order. I am compelled, though, to remind us that the motion that was passed back in September said that the 4-hour time limit on Erie Boulevard be changed to a no overnight parking.
I know I'm backpedaling on that
All
one,
right.
just trying to come up with something here.
With something, yeah, okay. Mr. Clerk, can you help us on that particular point? The motion that Councillor Height would like to put forward that we retain all existing parking spaces and retain a 4-hour parking limit.
Through you, yeah, it's significantly different enough from what was discussed in September that we could consider it now tonight, but I'm just trying to see the 4-hour. I don't see where the 4-hour was specifically passed.
Are you looking at the September 13th?
Mm-hmm.
It was. Oh, the other thing I think, Councillor Height, that would allow yours to go ahead, if you look at the text prior to that 4-hour time limit thing, staff be directed to bring back to council a report to consider detailed costs on, among other things, converting the time limit. So I would suggest in that case,
Yeah.
the 4-hour time limit remains in place, unless we move a motion to change it.
Yes.
That's gonna make me sleep better at night. Councillor Brunton, and I'll get back to you.
I like the idea of no overnight, though. Is that still in the motion?
Well, I think Mr. Baird has reminded us that's in
Absolutely.
effect in any event.
That is correct. And,
Okay, thank you.
and just again, the option 2 here, council hasn't supported it, so whatever's out there, 4-hour, no overnight, that stays, no reduction, it's in place.
Okay?
Yeah.
And again, back to you, Councillor Hyde. I think we've concluded that perhaps you wouldn't need to have another motion reaffirming 4-hour, but because that is the status quo based on our other decisions tonight.
Okay.
All right? But I want you to be comfortable with that because that's very important. You're quite right.
Comfort is relative, Mr. Chair.
But I think we'll be able to show, should we get inquiries, that given decisions tonight that were either taken or not taken about making changes, the current status quo is a 4-hour parking limit on the existing parking spaces that are there as of today. And therefore, in my opinion as chair, we don't need any further motions to reaffirm that tonight. But I'll listen to other speakers first. Councillor Geisens, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we're done with the parking spaces, I talked about it earlier, and we've been looking at Woodstock, basically, and seeing what's happening and the erosion that has taken place. And I talked about it earlier that maybe sometime in the middle of April, I should say, that we should go out there and check and see if there is a beach for people to go to. And if there isn't, I would suggest that we need to barricade those walkways or whatever and make it clear that there is no public beach in this area with a sign, so people don't go through private properties to enjoy the lake, because certainly I don't think we want anybody on private property. So I'll make that a motion if it needs to be a motion.
I think it will, but I'm going to ask for another speaker first.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll certainly support that. I know I brought that up under other business this year. The access point at Conductor Lane is a complete and utter disaster. To leave it open is not a good idea. There's rock underneath what used to be sand. It's a very tight one anyway, and even the cottages are in trouble. So, but honestly, I don't know that council should have to do that. I sort of was hoping that staff,
Well,
when they go down there,
Maybe staff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was the intent, that staff would be asked, and I'm going to look to Mr. Cridlin, because I think it falls most directly within his department's mandate in terms of public safety and access and suitability of lanes and pathways, et cetera, to take users to a spot. So, Mr. Cridlin, can you help us a bit on that?
Through the chair, I would maybe suggest a combination, my division as well as Lee Robson Public Works.
Okay.
And we can definitely look at that at the end of April, and I guess get back to council on what should be open and what should be closed, and bring some pictures along as well to verify what we're seeing.
Councillor, yes, thank you very much. By mid-April, Councillor, or? Yeah, I would suggest the worst of the winter storms will be done by then, so we may be looking at what will likely happen in the spring, summer. Mr. Clerk, have you got? Okay. Put your mic on, please.
Something else that we may have to consider, where there is parking on Erie Boulevard in that area, do we need to look at it and make sure that there's a sign that says that there is no access to the beach in this area?
Good point. I think if the decision is made that one or more of the public access points needs to be closed, at least temporarily, then similarly, where it's signed out on Erie Boulevard, we would certainly need to place signage there advising the public that that particular access point has had to be closed for public safety or other reasons. So I think that would be a decision we'll make, Councillor, at the point at which we get a report back from staff, if you're okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Mr. Clerk, would you read the motion, please, that Councillor Geisens has put forward?
That staff be directed to examine the beach access points in Long Point in regards to whether there is a risk to public safety, and bring the information back in April of 2017.
By mid-April of 2017. Mr. County Manager?
And I'm sorry, I don't want to be a stickler for details, but I think we need to call them pedestrian accesses, because that's what they're actually called, and we don't use the term beach
Yes.
access.
Good point. Thank you
Okay,
very
thank
much.
you.
Mr. Clerk, you'll clarify or correct that as well. All right, having heard the motion, Council, a move by Councillor Geisens, those in favor of that? Those opposed? That does carry. Thank you very much. All right, Council, that's been a struggle, but I appreciate your and staff's efforts, and we did get our way through that report. And that will allow us to move on to staff report DCS 17-07, which is the 2017 municipal grants. Mr. Baird, you're on again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's change gears here, and this is our annual report that we bring forward for council's consideration. We always try to get it before the budget session. And so, just in brief, this is an annual program, the 2017 municipal grants. It includes $62,000, which is approximately $1 per capita in Norfolk County, and it's included in the base mayor and council's operating budget. And we use that each year to issue to applicants, suitable applicants, that make submissions by November 1st of each year. And so last year, council had agreed to having TDAB form a subcommittee to essentially be a grant review team. And they have gone through the 13 new grant requests that were submitted within the prescribed time frame. And they're attached under attachment A. There's also some supplementary information that was included for you on a pink sheet, just outlining some of the rationale, the recommendations. These were subsequently reviewed by SLT a few weeks before Christmas, and we've put forward the proposal here. The council support the recommendations of the grant review team, and that in addition to those high school bursaries and those fairs and festivals that are grandparented in through the policy amount to $39,000 for the 2017 budget. And if council so approves those, that will remain, or leave remaining $23,000 for the remainder of the year to be used for other such requests or any waiving of fees at whatever council's discretion. The only addition to the report, Mr. Chairman, is a motion that the TDAB Advisory Board has put forward, is for council to consider a second intake with a deadline of April 30th each year, which would effectively make 2 intakes, November 1st and